On January 15, 2006, Kendrick Antonio Simpson, then a 25-year-old man from New Orleans recently displaced by Hurricane Katrina, set in motion actions that would define the rest of his life and forever change the lives of others. That night in Oklahoma City, Simpson's decisions would lead to one of the most brutal and unambiguous double murders, for which a jury would hand down 2 death sentences nearly a decade later. The violence Simpson unleashed wasn't random. It was deliberate, sustained, and lethal. Simpson's path to that January night was marked by instability. Born in October 1980, he grew up in a fractured environment, moving through life with little stability or support. By his mid-teens, he had dropped out of school, possessed a growing criminal history, and survived being shot 5 times by acquaintances in his home city, an incident that left him hospitalized for months and haunted by paranoia. Those early years of violence and trauma followed him west after Hurricane Katrina destroyed much of New Orleans in 2005. In Oklahoma City, Simpson and 2 companions, Latango Robertson and Jonathan Dalton, drove to a hip-hop nightclub called Fritzy's shortly after midnight on the night of January 15, 2006. Simpson carried with him a military-style assault rifle, an AK-style weapon that was central to the carnage that followed. Inside the club, Simpson's behavior was volatile. According to friends who testified later, he looked for trouble, antagonizing other patrons with threats and aggressive conduct. A confrontation ensued between Simpson and a group of young men, including Glenn Palmer, age 20, and Anthony Jones, age 19. Eyewitness accounts and testimony at trial would later describe a physical altercation shortly before Simpson and his companions left the club. Outside, under the Oklahoma City lights, Simpson's resentment boiled over into premeditated violence. He instructed the driver of the Monte Carlo he was in to follow the other group's vehicle. For miles through city streets, Simpson pursued the car carrying Palmer, Jones, and a third friend, London Johnson. Then, without mediation or retreat, Simpson opened fire. Between 20 and 25 rounds from his assault rifle erupted into the victim's vehicle. The aftermath was terrifying. Palmer and Jones were struck repeatedly and killed at the scene. Johnson, sitting in the back seat, survived only by chance. Stray bullets from Simpson's sustained fusillade tore into the interior of a nearby home, narrowly missing an innocent resident. The carnage was textbook execution, not a spontaneous reaction, but cold, continuous gunfire into a moving vehicle. Shortly after his arrest, Simpson's 2 companions, Robertson and Dalton, cooperated with authorities. They pleaded guilty to acting as accessories to murder and accepted 20-year prison terms, later reduced with time served. But for Simpson, no plea deal was offered, and no bargaining would spare his life. At trial in Oklahoma County District Court in 2007, the evidence against Simpson was overwhelming. A jury convicted him on multiple charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder with malice aforethought, discharging a firearm with intent to kill, and possession of a firearm after a prior felony conviction. The state of Oklahoma also presented for aggravating factors: Simpson's prior felony involving violence, the great risk of death he knowingly created, the heinous, atrocious, or cruel nature of the murders, and the probability he posed a continuing threat to society. Jurors found each allegation true, convicting Simpson on all counts and sentencing him to death twice, once for each murder. Additional punishment included a life sentence for discharging the firearm with intent to kill and a concurrent 10-year sentence for unlawful firearm possession. From the moment of sentencing, Simpson's case entered the labyrinthine world of death penalty appeals. His defense attorneys argued that evidence of his post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and mental health struggles should have been considered during the guilt phase of the trial. They claimed the trial court improperly excluded that evidence, and later alleged prosecutors withheld information that could have discredited a jailhouse informant. Simpson's legal team raised multiple constitutional challenges, claims of prosecutorial misconduct, jury instruction issues that limited consideration of mitigation, ineffective assistance of counsel, and a cumulative errors argument. In 2018, the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit granted a certificate of appealability on several grounds, but ultimately affirmed the denial of his federal habeas petition, reinforcing both the convictions and death sentences. Throughout appeals, Simpson also sought relief in federal district court, challenging his convictions under 28 U.S.C. Section 2254. Judges examined every procedural and substantive argument presented, but courts consistently rejected claims that trial errors or evidentiary decisions warranted overturning his convictions or sentences. In 2019, Simpson's petition for review by the United States Supreme Court, which would have been his final major appellate opportunity, was declined, leaving his death sentences intact and his path toward execution clear. By 2025, Simpson had spent more than 16 years on Oklahoma's death row at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. As the first person in the state scheduled for execution in 2026, his case drew renewed attention as authorities sought to set an execution date of February 12, 2026. In late 2025, the Oklahoma Attorney General submitted a clemency packet to the Pardon and Parole Board, arguing Simpson had never shown genuine remorse and stressing the brutal nature of his crimes. The state highlighted that Simpson hunted his victims, executed them without hesitation, and then boasted about what he had done, emphasizing the enduring suffering of the victims' families. Simpson's attorneys, in turn, argued clemency was warranted because of Simpson's traumatic past, documented PTSD, and lifelong psychological damage. They highlighted childhood abuse, early exposure to violence and drugs, severe injuries he suffered before the murders, and his ongoing mental health struggles. Supporters of clemency pointed to Simpson's solitude in prison, his solitary confinement, and his expressed remorse during the hearing. On January 14, 2026, after a 2-hour clemency hearing that included powerful statements from victims, survivors, and families, as well as Simpson's own plea for mercy, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 to deny clemency. The decision cleared the procedural path for Simpson's execution to proceed as scheduled, absent any last-minute stays from courts or the governor. In his address during that hearing, Simpson apologized to the families of Palmer and Jones and acknowledged his responsibility. Yet for the families, the loss of 2 young lives, both killed in a hail of gunfire on a lonely city road, remained unforgivable. One survivor, London Johnson, still carries the trauma of that night with him, replaying the images of his friends dying over and over in his mind. As the calendar turned toward February 12, 2026, Kendrick Antonio Simpson stood at the precipice of the ultimate legal and moral reckoning. Execution by lethal injection for the murders of Glenn Palmer and Anthony Jones. Crimes committed nearly 2 decades ago, whose echoes continue to reverberate through courtrooms, families, and the broader debate over capital punishment in the United States.